Sign it, Mom. Meg doesn't need to know. I was standing in the hallway of the house I grew up in when I heard my brother say that. Through the kitchen doorway, I watched my mother's hand stop above the paper, the pen tilted, not moving. 75 years old. A church directory on the fridge behind her, my father's flag folded in the cabinet. She still dusted every Sunday. Roy slid a single page across the table toward her. One page, one signature line, one quitclaim deed that would have handed him the house in under a minute. You're probably waiting for the part where I storm in and put him in his place. There isn't one. I'd stopped needing that years before. What I felt, standing in that hallway, was the old cold settling into my right shoulder the way it does before rain. The way it has since a transport flight outside Ramstein in 1998 left something in there that never set right. I didn't move yet. I just watched the pen. Because here is what Roy didn't know about the sister he'd spent 30 years calling the one who plays soldier. He didn't know what I did in the army. He didn't know what was already sitting in a folder in my car. And he had no idea that the quietest person at that table had read more documents like the one in his hand than he'd ever sign in his life. To understand the look that crossed his face 40 minutes later, you have to go back to the spring our father died, and the promise I made over his hospital bed that I would not break, no matter what it cost. Part 1. My name is Margaret Halloran. Most people call me Meg. For 26 years I served in the United States Army, and for the last 19 of those I was a judge advocate, a JAG officer, which is the Army's way of saying lawyer in a uniform. I prosecuted. I defended. I sat in small rooms with people on the worst day of their lives and read the fine print out loud until the fine print stopped lying to them. I retired a lieutenant colonel. Say that to impress anybody. I say it because it matters to what happened, and because almost nobody in my own family ever bothered to ask what the job actually was. To my brother Roy, the Army was a costume. He'd say it at Thanksgiving with a little smile, the way you'd describe a hobby that had gone on too long. Meg's still playing soldier. He said it when I made captain. He said it when I made major. He said it the year I spent in a forward legal office in Kandahar, advising a brigade commander on the laws of armed conflict. And he said it the year I came home and couldn't sit with my back to a door. Roy sold commercial real estate. He believed that anything which did not produce a commission was, on some level, pretend. I want to be fair to him, because the easy version of this story is the one where Roy was a monster from the cradle, and that version is a lie, and lies are exactly what got us into this. Roy was not a monster. Roy was a man who had spent his whole life one good quarter away from the life he thought he deserved, and who had decided somewhere in his 50s that the people around him owed him the difference. There were 3 of us, me, the oldest, Roy, 2 years behind, and our little sister Claire, who came late and soft and trusting, 8 years younger than me, the only one of us who still cried at movies. Claire married a decent, tired man named Wade, and they had a daughter, Bella, who was 19 the year all of this happened, and home from her first year of community college with a nose ring and a lot of opinions about everybody. And at the center of it, in the house on Pearl Street, was our mother, Eleanor. Our father, Tom Halloran, died on a Tuesday in April. Lung cancer, the kind that doesn't negotiate. He'd been a high school shop teacher for 31 years, and a Navy man before that. And he built half the furniture in that house with his own hands, including the kitchen table that the quitclaim deed would later sit on. He was not a sentimental man. The most emotional thing I ever heard him say, he said to me in that hospital room, 3 days before the end, when the morphine had taken the edges off his pride. "Watch your mother," he said. "She'll give the shirt off her back to whoever asks last." I told him I would. You always tell a dying man you will. The difference, in my case, was that I meant it like an order. Here is the thing about my mother that you need to understand. Because Roy understood it perfectly and used it like a tool. Eleanor Halloran was not weak. She raised 3 children on a teacher's salary, ran the food pantry at St. Bridget's for 20 years, and could quote the entire Book of Ruth from memory. But she had one fault, and it was the fault of generous people everywhere. She could not stand to be the reason someone she loved was unhappy. She would rather be robbed than be the one who said no. And after my father died, that fault grew teeth, because grief had hollowed her out and loneliness had moved into the empty space. She started forgetting things that spring, small things. The name of a neighbor she'd known for 40 years, whether she'd taken her blood pressure pill, where she'd put the checkbook. The doctor used the phrase mild cognitive impairment and told us as it might progress slowly, or quickly, or not much at all. That there was no way to know yet. She was, the doctor was careful to say, still fully capable of making her own decisions, still competent, just slower, just more tired, just easier, though he didn't say this part, to lead. I lived 4 hours away, in a little brick house outside Fayetteville, close to the post where I'd done my last tour before retiring. Claire lived 20 minutes from Mom. Roy lived 10. I want you to remember those distances, because they became weapons too. Roy was the one who was there. Roy was the one who took her to the pharmacy. Roy was the one. He reminded everyone constantly, who carried the burden while his big sister sat down south, playing soldier, and his little sister had her own life to manage. What I didn't know that spring, what none of us knew, was that Roy's life was on fire. His real estate firm had been bleeding for 3 years. The market had turned, his partner had walked, and Roy had done the thing that desperate men with good credit and bad judgment always do. He'd borrowed against the future to pay for the present, and then borrowed against that, and then borrowed against the only asset he had left, which was the assumption that he would inherit a third of his mother's estate. He had taken out a line of credit against an inheritance that didn't exist yet, from a mother who wasn't dead, on a house that wasn't his, and then the loan came due. I learned all of this later, in pieces, the way you learn the shape of an iceberg by what it does to the ship. At the time, all I knew was that something felt wrong, and I had spent my whole career learning to trust that feeling, because in my line of work, the feeling that something is wrong is usually a document somebody doesn't want you to read. The first wrong thing was the phone calls. I called my mother every Sunday after church, the way I had since I joined up at 18. It was the one fixed point in my week, deployment or not. And starting that June, she stopped picking up. I'd call, it would ring out, and an hour later I'd get a text from Roy's phone, not hers, saying Mom was napping, Mom was at the store, Mom was fine, don't worry, he had it handled. Have it handled. That was Roy's phrase. He used it the way some people use a door. The second wrong thing was the visit in July. I drove up for Mom's birthday. She turned 75 that summer, and Claire and I had planned a small thing, just family, in the backyard. When I got there 3 days early because I'd cleared my calendar, the house was different. My father's tools were gone from the garage. Sold, Roy said when I asked. She doesn't need them. They were just sitting there. There was a new flat-screen television in the den that my mother, who watched exactly 2 programs and read the rest of the time, would never have bought. And there was a stack of mail on the counter, opened, that I wasn't supposed to see, and that I read anyway, because reading other people's mail is wrong, unless you are protecting a vulnerable person from financial abuse, in which case it is called diligence, and I have done it under oath. A home equity line of credit application, in my mother's name, for $140,000, filled out in handwriting that was not my mother's. I put it back exactly where it had been, squared the corner the way it had been squared, and I went out into the backyard, where my mother was sitting in the shade, snapping the ends off green beans into a colander, the way she had every summer of my entire life, and I sat down next to her, and I did not say a single word about any of it. Because the worst thing you can do, when you suspect someone is being manipulated, is to tip your hand to the manipulator. I learned that the hard way, years ago, in a case involving a soldier and a predatory lender, and I did not intend to learn it twice. You look thin, Mama, I said instead. She patted my knee. Her hand was so light. I forget to eat, she said. Roy brings me things, but I forget. She looked at me, and for 1 second, the fog cleared and she was entirely herself, sharp as the day she taught me to read, and she said, Margaret, is your brother in trouble? I have lied for a living. I have stood in front of military judges and protected guilty men because the Constitution required it and I'd taken an oath. But I could not, sitting in that backyard, lie to my mother's face. I think he might be, I said. I'm going to find out. Don't, she said, and her hand tightened on my knee with a strength that surprised me. Don't shame him. He's my son. Whatever it is, I'd rather give it to him than watch him beg for it. There it was. The thing my father warned me about 3 days before he died, said back to me, almost word for word by the woman he'd loved for 53 years. I'd rather give it to him. I didn't argue. You don't argue with 75 years of love. I just filed it away, next to everything else, and I started watching. The birthday party was small. Claire made a sheet cake. Bella took pictures on her phone. Wade grilled chicken and burned half of it, and apologized to everyone individually. Roy showed up an hour late, in a suit that cost more than my first car, with a card and no gift. And he was charming, God. He was charming. Kissing Mom on the top of her head, and calling her the birthday queen, and I watched my mother light up under his attention like a plant turned toward a window, and I understood with a cold clarity exactly how this was going to work. He didn't need to threaten her. He never would. He just had to be the only warmth in the room, and then very gently ask. After the cake, when Mom had gone inside to lie down, and Bella had taken Wade off to look at something on her phone, Roy found me by the cooler. He cracked a beer he didn't offer to share and looked out at the yard like a man surveying property. "You should think about moving up here," he said. "Be closer." Mom's slowing down. "It's a lot to carry." "You seem to be carrying it fine," I said. He smiled. It didn't reach his eyes. "Somebody has to, while you were off seeing the world." "Is that what I was doing?" "You know what I mean." He took a long pull of the beer. "Look, there's stuff coming up. Mom's getting to the age where we need to get her affairs organized. Power of attorney, the house, all of it. I've been talking to a guy. It'd be cleaner if it all ran through one person. Simpler for her, less confusing." He said the word confusing with a tenderness that made my skin crawl. I'm the one who's here. Makes sense for it to be me. And there it was, laid out on the cooler between us like a hand of cards. The power of attorney. The house, one person. Him. "That's a big responsibility," I said. "You'd want it done right, witnessed, notarized. A lawyer who specializes in elder law, not a guy. You'd want it to hold up if anybody ever asked questions." His jaw tightened, just slightly, the way it had when we were kids, and I'd caught him in something. Who's going to ask questions? I looked at my brother for a long moment. The cold in my shoulder had spread up into my neck the way it does. I might, I said. Then I picked up the colander of green beans my mother had left on the table, and I carried it into the kitchen, and I started snapping the ends off the ones she hadn't finished, because somebody had to, and because it gave my hands something to do that wasn't closing around my brother's throat. That night, back at my hotel, I did not stay in the house. I never stayed in the house. I needed a door I could lock, and a record nobody else controlled. I opened my laptop and did the thing I do best. I read. Public records are public for a reason. The county recorder's office, the court's online docket, the state's business registry. All of it sitting there for anybody patient enough to look. By 2 a.m, I had the shape of it. Roy's firm had 2 judgments against it. A supplier had sued him for $40,000 and won. There was a lien. His house, the nice one, the one with the pool, had a notice of default filed against it in March. And in May, a power of attorney document had been recorded with the county, naming Roy Halloran as attorney in fact for Eleanor Halloran, granting him broad authority over her financial affairs, including the power to sell, transfer, and encumber real property. It had been signed by my mother, witnessed by a notary I'd never heard of. 2 weeks after her diagnosis, I sat in that hotel room and I felt the floor tilt under me. And I want to tell you I felt rage, because rage is clean and it would make me the hero of this story. But the skill, the real skill, the one the Army spent 2 decades grinding into me, is the one where the floor tilts and you do not move. Where you should sit very still and you separate what you feel from what you know, and you build, slowly, the thing that will hold. Not anger. A record. The power of attorney by itself might be legitimate. My mother was competent in May. A generous, frightened widow might genuinely sign over her affairs to the son who was there. It would be foolish, but foolish is legal. What was not legal, what would never be legal, was using that authority to loot her. And the home equity application in handwriting that wasn't hers told me that the looting had already started, and that Roy had moved from borrowing on his own future to borrowing on hers. But a power of attorney has a ceiling. It lets him drain her accounts and take loans in her name, which was bad enough. What it did not do, cleanly, was give him the house free and clear, out of the estate, beyond the reach of Claire and me and any future reckoning. For that, he needed the deed. For that, he needed her to sign the property away while she still legally could. To him, directly by her own hand, so that when the dementia advanced and the questions came, and the other heirs came looking, the record would say she chose it, gave it, freely. He needed a quitclaim deed, and he needed her to sign it before she got any worse. Because every month that passed was a month closer to the day a court would say she could no longer legally sign anything at all. I closed the laptop. Outside the hotel window, the parking lot lights sussed, and a truck idled somewhere. And my shoulder ached with the old familiar weather of it. I thought about my father, watch your mother. I thought about Eleanor's hand on my knee, don't shame him. And I thought with the particular calm that frightens people who only ever see me calm. All right, Roy. Let's do it your way. Let's get her affairs in order, and we'll do it clean. Witnessed, notarized, with a lawyer who specializes in exactly this, just not your lawyer. Part 2. I want to be honest about something, because this is the part of the story where the easy version would have me drive straight to Roy's house and break his door down. I didn't. And it wasn't because I'm a saint. It's because I'd watched, more than once in my career, a righteous person torch their own case by moving too soon. The man who confronts the embezzler before the audit is complete doesn't stop the theft. He just teaches the embezzler to hide it better and gives him a head start. So I went home to Fayetteville, and I started building, and I waited, and the waiting was the hardest soldiering I have ever done. Because every Sunday my mother didn't answer. The phone was a Sunday. I had to trust I was doing the right thing by being slow. The first thing I did was call Daniel Okafor. Daniel and I had served together a long time ago, back when we were both young captains and certain of everything. He'd left the army after his first commitment and gone into elder law. Wills, trusts, guardianships, the whole quiet machinery of how families either protect their old people or fail to. He worked out of a 2-room office in Greensboro now and answered his own phone. Which is how I knew he was the real thing. The good ones don't have a wall of people between you and them. Meg Halloran, he said, when I told him who it was. I thought you fell off the earth. I need an hour of your time, I said. And I need you to tell me when I'm wrong, because I'm too close to this one to trust my own read. I sent him everything. The recorded power of attorney. The default notices. The judgments. A photograph I'd taken. I'm not proud of how, but I took it. Of the home equity application in the handwriting that wasn't my mother's. And he called me back the next morning and he didn't waste time. Okay, he said. First, breathe. Second, here's what you've actually got, and here's what you don't. This is the part where I'm going to slow down, because Daniel said something to me that morning that I think more people need to hear than will ever hear it. And the whole reason I'm telling you this story is so that it lands with even one person who needs it. There are 3 different things at play here, Daniel said, and people mix them up constantly, and the mixing up is exactly how the Roys of the world get away with it. There's a power of attorney. There's a deed, and there's guardianship. They are not the same, and the difference is everything. A power of attorney, he explained, is a document where a competent person voluntarily gives someone else authority to act for them. The key word is competent. And competent isn't a switch. It's a spectrum, and the law has a name for what happens when someone technically competent is steered into signing something against their own interest by a person they depend on and entrust. It's called undue influence. It's not the same as fraud, and it's not the same as forgery. It's subtler and it's older, and the courts have been wrestling with it for 200 years. Because it lives in the gap between she signed it and she chose it. Undue influence, Daniel said, is what you have when an isolated, grieving, frightened person signs something because the only warm hand in their life is attached to the arm holding the pen. It doesn't require a gun. It requires loneliness, dependence, and a deadline. And from what you're telling me, your brother has manufactured all 3. A deed, he said, is different. A quitclaim deed transfers whatever ownership a person has in a property to someone else, immediately with almost no protections. It's the bluntest instrument in real estate. People use them legitimately all the time, to add a spouse to a title, to move a house into a trust. And people use them to steal, because a frightened old woman at a kitchen table can sign one in 30 seconds and not understand, until it's far too late, that she has just made herself homeless. And guardianship, that was the third thing, and Daniel's voice changed when he got to it. If your mother's competence is genuinely failing, he said, and if she's being financially exploited, there's a court remedy. You can petition to become her guardian or her conservator. The names vary by state. A judge evaluates her capacity, appoints someone independent to investigate, and if the petition's granted, The court takes the power out of the abuser's hands and puts it under supervision. It's slow, it's invasive, it's painful, and families avoid it because it feels like declaring war on your own blood. But Meg, it exists for exactly this. It exists for the mother who'd rather be robbed than say no. I wrote it all down: POE, deed, guardianship, undue influence. I wrote it the way I used to write briefing notes, in block capitals, because block capitals don't shake even when the hand does. What do I do first? I asked. You don't confront him, Daniel said. Not yet. The minute he knows you're looking, he accelerates. He'll get the deed signed tomorrow and spend the money the day after, and then you're not preventing a crime, you're trying to claw back assets that are already gone. Right now you have the most precious thing in any of these cases, and you're about to throw it away if you're not careful. What's that? He doesn't know you know. So I built. Quietly, the way you build a case, not a confrontation. I called Adult Protective Services in my mother's county. Not to make a wild accusation, but to ask questions and to start a paper trail, because a report on file dated is worth more than 1,000 angry phone calls later. The intake worker, a patient woman named Rosas, listened to the whole thing and told me something I'll never forget. That financial exploitation of the elderly is the most common form of elder abuse in the country, and the least reported, because the victim almost always loves the person robbing them and would rather lose the house than lose the child. I told her that sounded exactly like my mother. She said it sounded like everyone's mother. That's why it works. I drove up again, this time without telling Roy, and I took my mother to her own doctor, not Roy's guy, and I asked with her permission for a formal capacity evaluation. Not because I wanted her declared incompetent. I didn't. I wanted the opposite. I wanted a dated, professional record of exactly where her mind stood, so that no one, ever, could claim more impairment or less impairment than the truth, depending on which lie served them. The evaluation came back the way I expected. Mild impairment, fluctuating, but legal capacity intact for now, with a note that she was highly suggestible and emotionally dependent, and should not execute significant legal or financial documents without independent counsel present. Daniel told me that sentence was worth more than gold. And I did one more thing, and this is the thing that ended it, in the end. I asked my mother, gently, on a good day, sitting at that kitchen table my father built, if I could put a little camera up. For her safety, I said, which was true. So that if she fell, someone would know. So that if she got confused about whether she'd locked the door, she could check. She liked the idea. She was lonely, and the camera, in some sad way, felt like company. It pointed at the kitchen, at the table, at the chair where she sat and signed things. I installed it myself. I made sure she understood it. I wrote down the date and had her initial a little note saying she'd consented. Because consent matters, and because I am, before I am a sister or a daughter, a lawyer, and a lawyer protects the record even when the record is her own family. Then I went home and I waited, and I let Roy believe he was winning. He moved faster than even Daniel predicted, because the loan he'd taken against his own house had a foreclosure date, and the foreclosure date was real and it was coming, and it did not care about anybody's feelings. Through August, the calls from Mom dried up almost completely. Bella, God bless that 19-year-old and her nose ring, started texting me on her own, worried, telling me Uncle Roy was at Grandma's a lot, that there was a man with a briefcase there twice, that Grandma seemed weird and far away. I told Bella she was doing the right thing and to keep her eyes open and her mouth shut, and that one day soon I'd explain everything. There were 2 more people who mattered, and I found them the way I find everything, by being patient and asking quiet questions of people nobody else bothered to ask. The first was a neighbor. Her name was Dot Pelletier, and she'd lived across the street from my parents for 30 years, and she was the kind of 78-year-old who misses absolutely nothing through a kitchen curtain. I sat on her porch one afternoon with a glass of her terrible iced tea, and I didn't accuse anybody of anything. I just asked her how Mom was doing, and Dot, who had buried her own husband and watched her own circle her own savings like a buzzard, told me everything without my asking a single pointed question. She told me Roy came on Tuesdays and Thursdays. She told me there'd been a man with a briefcase, twice, and that the second time Eleanor had stood at her own front door afterward, in the cold, in her housecoat, looking at the street like she didn't quite know how she'd gotten there. She told me she'd brought Eleanor a casserole in August and that my mother had said, apropos of nothing, holding the dish with both shaking hands, Dot, do you think a person can give a thing away without knowing they gave it? Dot said she'd thought about that sentence for a week. I wrote it down. Verbatim. Dated. A neighbor's contemporaneous account of a vulnerable adult's confusion is not nothing in front of a judge. It is, in fact, a great deal. The second was a home health aide. Mom had started seeing one twice a week that summer, a young woman named Tanya, who came to check her blood pressure and help with her pills, arranged through the county, and who, therefore, this is the part Roy never thought about, kept notes. Professional notes dated in a chart, because that's what aides do. I didn't ask Tanya to break any confidence. I didn't have to. I asked my mother on a clear day to request her own records, which she had every right to do, and to let me read them with her. And there in Tanya's careful handwriting was a line from late August. Client tearful. State's son brought papers to sign and she didn't want to disappoint him. States she does not understand the documents. Advised client to consult independent attorney before signing anything. Client agreed but appeared frightened. Tanya had done her job. Tanya had told my mother the exact right thing 6 weeks before I ever walked through that door, and my mother, alone and lonely and steered, hadn't been able to act on it. That's not weakness. That's what undue influence looks like from the inside. It looks like a frightened person being told the right answer by a stranger and not being able to reach it, because the only person who visits her is the one holding the pen. I had a neighbor, I had an aide, I had a doctor's evaluation, I had a notary's professional spine, I had public records, bank records, a camera, and Bella's wide-open eyes. I had Daniel Okafor and a folder full of motions. What I did not have and what I refused to manufacture was a confrontation before the case was ready, brick by brick. You don't win the room by shouting in it. You win it by being the only person who walked in already holding the wall. Claire I kept close but careful. My little sister could not keep a secret to save her life. And worse, she still wanted to believe the best of Roy. The way she wanted to believe the best of everyone, and I could not risk her warning him out of some misguided hope that talking it out would fix it. So I told Claire only this, that I was worried about Mom's finances, that I was looking into it, and that if Roy ever asked her to come to a meeting about Mom's house, she should call me first, before she said yes, before she said anything. Claire promised. Claire, to her enormous credit, kept that promise. It's the reason she's in the good part of this story instead of the wreckage. The call came on a Wednesday in early September. It was Claire, whispering, even though she was alone in her car. Roy called, she said. He says there's a family meeting Saturday at Mom's. He says it's about getting her estate organized before things get worse with her memory. He says you're invited, but he doesn't think you'll come, and he made it sound like. Meg, he made it sound like, if you do come, you're just going to upset her. He said the lawyer will be there and a notary, and we can all sign as witnesses and it'll be done and we won't have to worry anymore. I closed my eyes. There it was. The deed, the kitchen table, the notary, the witnesses. He was going to do it in front of the family, in the open, because doing it in the open is the oldest trick of the confident thief. It makes the theft look like a ceremony. Make everyone sign as a witness, and you've made everyone complicit, and you've made the betrayal feel like a Saturday afternoon obligation nobody wanted to make a scene about. Claire, I said, listen to me very carefully. You're going to go to that meeting. You're going to be calm and sweet and a little tired, exactly like always. You're not going to warn him about anything, and you're going to let me handle the rest. What are you going to do? I thought about my father's hand in that hospital room. I thought about the camera pointed at the table. I thought about Daniel Okafor, who had already, at my request, drafted a guardianship petition and an emergency motion to freeze my mother's accounts, both sitting ready in a folder, waiting only for a date. I'm going to come to the meeting, I said, and I'm going to bring a guest. Port. 3 I drove up Friday night and I did not call ahead. I stayed in the same hotel with the buzzing lot, and I laid my clothes out the way I used to lay out a uniform, and I slept 4 hours, which is more than I slept the night before some of the worst days of my career and less than I'd have liked. In the morning, my shoulder told me it was going to rain, and it was right, the way it's been right for 27 years. Daniel met me at a diner at 8. He'd driven over from Greensboro in a gray suit that had seen better decades, with a leather folder and a face like a closed door. With him was a woman named Patrice, a notary and a paralegal who'd worked elder abuse cases with him for years, and who carried herself with the specific unhurried steadiness of a person who has watched a great many families come apart at kitchen tables and has decided to be the calm in it. "Walk me through the room," Daniel said over eggs neither of us touched. "Who'll be there, where they'll sit, who your mother trusts." I told him. Roy at the head of the table, because Roy always sat at the head of the table the way other men breathe. The lawyer, Roy's guy, whoever he was, to his right, with the documents. A notary Roy had brought to make it official, Claire and Wade and Bella somewhere along the sides. My mother in her chair, the second from the end, the one nearest the window, the one my father always saved her. "And you?" Daniel asked. "I wasn't planning to sit," I said. Patrice almost smiled. We arrived at 11. The meeting was set for 11:30. Roy's car was already there, and another I didn't recognize, a sensible sedan that belonged, I'd learn, to a young attorney named Phillips who Roy had found through an ad, and who, I want to be fair, was not a criminal. Just lazy, just incurious, just willing to prepare a quitclaim deed and a fistful of transfer documents without ever once asking himself whether the 75-year-old woman signing them understood what she was doing, because asking would have cost him a client. I let Roy get settled. I let the lawyer lay out his papers. I let the notary set up her little stamp and her logbook. Through the kitchen window, I could see them, arranged exactly as I'd predicted, Roy at the head, my mother in her chair by the window, with her hands folded in her lap and her cardigan buttoned wrong, and Claire across from her, pale and obedient, doing exactly what I'd asked and not one thing more. And I watched my mother's hand reach for the pen, and I watched Roy lean toward her and say the words I'd hear, played back later off the camera, in his warm and terrible voice. "Sign it, Mom. Meg doesn't need to know." That's when I opened the door. I came in quiet. I always come in quiet. Roy looked up, and his face did a thing I'd been waiting 30 years to see. It tried to be welcoming and it failed, and underneath the failure was the specific naked fear of a man who has just realized that the variable he discounted is standing in the doorway. "Meg," he said, "you came. We weren't sure." "I came," I said, "and I brought a friend." Daniel stepped in behind me. Then Patrice. Roy's lawyer, Phillips, half rose, looking between them and his client, beginning, I think, to understand that the easy afternoon he'd been promised was not going to be easy. "This is Daniel Okafor," I said. "He's an elder law attorney, licensed in this state. He's here at my request, and at our mother's, because she has the right to independent counsel before she signs anything, and her own doctor put that in writing 6 weeks ago." I let that sit. "Mama, don't sign anything yet. I'm here. You don't have to be afraid of anyone in this room." My mother looked up at me, and for one terrible second I didn't know which version of her I was going to get, the foggy one or the sharp one, and then her eyes filled and she said, in a small voice, "I told him I didn't understand it. I told him 3 times. He kept saying it was just to make things easier." The room went very still. Roy recovered fast, I'll give him that. "Okay," he said, spreading his hands, the salesman, the closer. "Okay, this is exactly what I didn't want. Everybody's getting emotional. Meg, I love you, but you don't know what's been going on up here. Mom needs her affairs organized. Her memory's going. Somebody has to take responsibility, and I'm the one who's here. I'm the one carrying this while I what?" I said. "Play soldier?" He stopped. "Let's talk about what's been going on up here," I said, and I set my own folder on the table next to his, and I opened it, and this is the part I'd been building toward for 3 months, brick by patient brick. "Let's talk about the home equity line of credit application in Mom's name. For $140,000, filled out in handwriting that isn't hers. Let's talk about the power of attorney you recorded 2 weeks after her diagnosis, with a notary nobody in this family had ever met. Let's talk about the 2 judgments against your firm, and the lien, and the notice of default on your own house, dated March, which is exactly when you decided our mother's home needed to be. What was your word? Organized. With each item I laid a document on the table, face up, squared at the corners, the way you build a wall." Phillips, the lawyer, had gone gray. He was reading the default notice upside down, and I watched him do the math that a more careful man would have done in his own office weeks ago. "That deed in front of my mother," I said, nodding at the page Roy had slid across the table, "is a quitclaim deed transferring her house, her home. The home Dad built half of with his own hands, directly to you. Out of the estate. Out of Claire's reach, out of mine. Today, while she still legally can sign, because you knew that every month that passes is a month closer to a court saying she can't. You weren't getting her affairs in order, Roy. You were getting them in order before the door closed. You can't prove she didn't want to, Roy said, and his voice had an edge now, the salesman cracking. She signed the power of attorney herself. Nobody held her hand. You weren't here. You don't know what she said to me, alone, at this table. She wanted me to take care of things. Ask her. It was a good move. It was the only move he had left, and it was a good one, because it was almost true, and the almost true ones are the hardest to take apart. So I didn't argue with him. I'd learned a long time ago that you don't beat a man's story by contradicting it. You beat it by laying the other evidence next to it, and letting the room do the math. I don't have to ask her, Roy. Other people already did. I reached into my folder. This is a note from Tanya, Mom's home health aide, dated the 29th of August. In it she writes that Mom told her, "You brought papers to sign," that Mom said she didn't understand them, and that Mom was frightened. Tanya told her to see an independent attorney before signing anything. 6 weeks ago. I set it down. This is a statement from Dot Pelletier across the street, who watched a man with a briefcase come here twice and watched our mother stand in her own doorway afterward, like she couldn't remember how she got there. Dot will tell a judge that in August, Mom asked her, and I'm quoting, whether a person can give a thing away without knowing they gave it. I set that down too. And this is Mom's capacity evaluation from her own physician, 6 weeks ago, which says she is legally competent. Competent, Roy, I'm not taking that from her. But, and I'm quoting again, highly suggestible and emotionally dependent, and should not execute significant legal or financial documents without independent counsel present. I looked up at him. The rain had started for real now, a steady drum on the window over the sink. The window my father put in himself the summer I left for basic training. There's no independent counsel at this table, Roy. There's your lawyer, who you hired, and your notary, who you brought. That's not independent. That's a wedding where the groom hired all the witnesses. Phillips, the lawyer, had gone gray. He was reading the default notice upside down, and I watched him do the math that a more careful man would have done in his own office weeks ago. "We're not here to prove anything today, Mr. Halloran," Daniel said. "Proving things is what courts are for. We're here to make sure nothing gets signed that shouldn't, and to inform you of 3 documents that are already filed or ready to file." He laid them down himself, one by one, calm as Sunday. A report to Adult Protective Services, dated in July. A petition for emergency conservatorship of your mother's finances, to be heard by a judge who will appoint an independent investigator, and a motion to freeze the accounts currently under your power of attorney, pending that investigation. Roy looked at the documents. He looked at the lawyer he'd hired, who was now very busy sliding the quitclaim deed back into his own folder and putting his pen away, the universal gesture of a professional deciding he would like to not be part of this. He looked at Claire, who was crying now and shaking her head slowly. He looked at Bella, who had her phone up, and I realized she was recording, the kid on her own instinct, and I was so proud of her I could have wept. And then Roy looked at our mother. And he made the last mistake. The one I'd been almost hoping he wouldn't make, because it meant there was even less of my brother left than I'd feared. "Mom," he said, and his voice cracked into something I think was even real. "Mom, tell them. Tell them I've been the one taking care of you. Tell them you wanted to do this. Tell them, or I'm going to lose everything. Do you understand me? Everything, is that what you want? You want to watch your own son lose his house?" There it was. The whole machine, naked on the table, the guilt, the dependence, the deadline. The warm hand attached to the arm with the pen, asking the lonely, frightened, generous woman to choose between her son's comfort and her own survival, and counting on the thing my father had warned me about with his last clear breath, counting on her to choose him. And my mother, Eleanor Halloran, 75 years old, food pantry for 20 years, the whole book of Ruth by heart, looked at the son she loved more than her own safety. And I watched her hand drift toward the pen one more time, because that is who she was, that is the fault of generous people, and I opened my mouth to stop her. And Patrice, the notary, who had said nothing this entire time, spoke first. "Ma'am," Patrice said, quiet and even, "I'm a notary. My job is to make sure the person signing understands what they're signing and isn't being pressured. I've watched this whole conversation. If you sign that paper right now, I am required by law to refuse to notarize it, because I've witnessed undue influence in real time, and my commission means nothing if I stamp it anyway. She looked at my mother with a kindness I will never forget. You don't have to sign anything today, ma'am. Nobody in any hurry to take your house has your best interest at heart. That's just true. My mother's hand stopped, and then it withdrew, and folded back into her lap, on top of the other one, and she looked down at them, and she said the bravest thing I have ever heard her say, braver than 50 years of marriage and 3 kids on a teacher's salary, and the whole book of Ruth. No, she said. Not today. Not like this. One word, really. No, the word she'd spent her whole life unable to say to the people she loved. She finally said it, at 75, at the table my husband, her husband, my father, built, with rain starting against the window, and she said it to her own son. And it cost her more than it would have cost me to say it 1,000 times, and that is exactly why it mattered so much that she was the one who said it, and not me. Roy stood up so fast his chair fell over. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say. He looked around the table at all of us, at the documents, at the lawyer packing his bag, at his crying sister, at his daughter's raised phone, at his mother's folded hands, and whatever calculation had been running behind his eyes for 3 desperate months, finally came up with a number it didn't like. He grabbed his folder. The one with the quitclaim deed in it, and he walked out of the house he'd been trying to steal. And the screen door banged behind him the way it had banged 10,000 times when we were children running in and out of that yard, and then he was gone, and the kitchen was just family. Part 4. The fallout took the better part of a year, and it was not clean, and I'm not going to pretend it was, because clean is the lie that got us into this, and I'm done with it. The foreclosure on Roy's house went through that winter. The line of credit he'd taken in his own name came due, and there was nothing behind it, and the firm dissolved in the slow, public, humiliating way that failing businesses do, one supplier and one judgment, and one unanswered phone call at a time. Adult Protective Services opened a formal case, and the investigator, a calm, relentless man named Okonkwo, no relation to Daniel, the world is small, confirmed what we already knew. That money had moved out of my mother's accounts under the power of attorney and into Roy's business in amounts she neither understood nor authorized. $41,000 in the end. Less than he'd hoped for, because I'd been slow and careful and gotten there before the deed, before the big number, before the house. We did not send my brother to prison. I want to be honest about that too, because the satisfying version of this story ends with handcuffs, and the true version ended somewhere quieter and stranger. My mother would not press criminal charges. She sat me down. On a good day, sharp as ever, she had a lot of good days that fall. The camera came down and the company of her actual children replaced it. And she told me that she had lost her husband and she was not going to spend whatever years she had left as the woman who put her son in a cell. She said it was her choice to make and not mine. And she was right. And that is the hardest sentence in this whole story to write, because every instinct I have, every year of training, screamed that the record demanded consequences. But we got the money back. Daniel's conservatorship petition was granted. An independent fiduciary was appointed. The accounts were unfrozen under supervision, and a civil judgment for the $41,000 was entered against Roy and is being collected slowly, garnished from whatever he earns now, which is not much, selling cars at a lot 2 counties over. He'll be paying our mother back for a long time. There's a justice in that, more durable than a cell, I've decided. Every month for years, he has to look at a deduction with her name on it and remember. I see Roy at Christmas. We don't talk much. He came to me that first Christmas, drunk and small, and tried to explain himself, the market, the partner who walked, the pressure, the deadline. And I let him talk because that's what you do, and when he was done I said the only thing I had left to say to him, which was, "You didn't have to steal from her, Roy. You had to ask. The whole tragedy is that she'd have given it to you. She told me that herself. The only thing you couldn't stand was needing it." He cried then, the way he cried at the table, and I didn't comfort him, because some things you have to carry yourself, and that one's his. Here's the part I actually want you to remember though. Not the fall of Roy Halloran, satisfying as it is to tell. About 6 months after that Saturday, my mother asked me to help her redo her estate. Properly, this time with Daniel. With all 3 of her children in the room, nothing hidden. We sat at the same table, and before we started, she made all of us, me and Roy and Claire, agree to one thing. She said it slow, the way she used to make us repeat our catechism. She said, "Whatever's in these papers, you will respect the person before the property. You will respect me as a person who is still here, still thinking, even when I'm slow. You will not decide for me until a doctor and a judge say I can't decide for myself. And you will not!" And here she looked at Roy, but gently. "You will not ever again confuse what someone can be talked into with what they actually choose. That's the whole thing, really. That's what 26 years in uniform and 3 months of careful documents and 1 folded flag in a cabinet finally came down to. The difference between can be talked into and actually chooses. A signature is not a choice. A signature obtained from a frightened, lonely, generous person staring down a deadline is just the legal residue of someone else's will. My mother knew the difference. Roy bet his whole life she wouldn't. And in the end, at a kitchen table, with rain on the window, she proved him wrong with 1 word. I think about my father in that hospital room more than I expected to. Watch your mother. She'll give the shirt off her back to whoever asks last. I thought it was a warning about her weakness. It took me the whole year to understand it was a description of her strength. That the same heart that could be exploited was the heart that ran a food pantry for 22 years. That the openness was not the flaw. The flaw was in the people who saw an open hand and decided to take instead of hold it. You don't fix a generous person by making them hard. You protect them. You stand in the doorway. You read the documents. You build the record brick by patient brick, and you make sure that when they finally say no, the law is standing behind them to back it up. My mother is still in the house. The deed is still in her name, in a proper trust now, with Claire as the successor trustee, because Claire kept the one promise that mattered and earned it. Bella's in nursing school. She says it's because of that Saturday, because of watching what it looks like when someone vulnerable has somebody in their corner who knows the rules. I didn't argue with her about it. Some good comes out crooked, and you don't straighten it, you just thank God it came. I drove home that night under a sky washing itself clean after the rain, and I pulled into my own little brick driveway, and I sat in the truck a minute before I went in, the way I do. My shoulder ached, the old weather of it. And I thought about my mother's hands, folding back into her lap, on top of each other, choosing herself for maybe the first time in her life. And I thought, that's what I served for. Not the flag exactly, though I'd die for it still. The thing under the flag. The idea that the rules are supposed to protect the person who can't shout loudest in the room. That the quietest person at the table is supposed to be safe. I kept my promise, Dad. It just didn't look the way either of us thought it would. One thing before I let you go. If this story stirred something in you, if you've got a parent or a grandparent who's getting older and getting lonelier, and a relative in the family who's suddenly very interested in their paperwork, I want you to do one thing for me. Don't look away because it's uncomfortable. Looking away is exactly the thing the Roys of the world are counting on. A note before you go. The legal mechanisms in this story, power of attorney, quitclaim deeds, guardianship and conservatorship, and the doctrine of undue influence, are real instruments used every day by elder law attorneys and adult protective services investigators across the United States. Laws differ from state to state, and what protected this family in one state may be structured differently in your own. If anything in this story made you think about your own family, please do not act on what you heard in a YouTube comment section. Sit down with a licensed elder law attorney in the state where your loved one actually lives. If you suspect an older person is being financially exploited, you can call the National Council on Aging or reach the Elder Care Locator at 1-800-677-1166, a free service that connects you to help in your area. I am not a lawyer, and nothing in this story is legal advice. I am someone who wanted to tell a story about the difference between what a person can be talked into and what they actually choose. Watch the people you love, especially the generous ones. They're the easiest to take from, and the most worth protecting.